just always wanted to do that.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome to our Facebook family who are joining us live today. It's so wonderful. This is, of course, Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Boston, and we are here today at 50 Dudley Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Those of you who are joining us on Facebook, we would love to see your energy in this community and love to welcome you. I am Reverend G. Stewart, and along with Reverend Ed Tansey, we are privileged to be the founders and co-spiritual leaders of this amazing and wonderful community. In this center, we learn to practice the science of mind philosophy, which is the study of life and the nature of the laws of thought. And we invite you at home to join us at our website at cslboston.org to find out more about our spiritual family, this phenomenal philosophy called the science of mind, and see how our community can serve you, or how you can be serving this community. And if this is where you are being spiritually fed, we ask that you include us in your prosperity and circulation or tithing practice with your tax-deductible donation that can be made right online at cslboston.org. So as we follow the 100 years of the science of mind philosophy, which is our year theme with Centers for Spiritual Living, we talk about 100 years of science of mind. And this month we're talking about freedom from fear and error thinking. That is our November theme. And today I'd like to talk about transference, something that Ernest Holmes was very familiar with because he loved psychology and so many different things. So what I want to speak to you today about is what transference means, what Ernest Holmes has to say about this subject of transference, and we are dealing only in form. Or are we dealing only in form? And then I want to offer us a process using Ernest Holmes' affirmation for transcendence from transference. Anybody up for that today? We ready to transcend from transference? I know I am. So, all right. So let's start with this, with what is the meaning of transference. Now, Barbara did a wonderful reading from the Living the Science of Mind, which is what we're basing this talk on today. And it was just a great explanation of what Ernest Holmes understood. And I just wanted to look at other possibilities. So I wanted to look at psychology today. This comes from the June 6th, 2010. It says this: transference, first described by Sigmund Freud, is a phenomenon in psychotherapy in which there is an unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to the other. So this is what is used in psychoanalysis, and in this process, this takes the patient back to a place, as Barbara explained in her reading, or the experience where something may have taken place in their life, right? So it takes them back to that place. Many times it goes back to our childhood. Something wonderful that Travis shared with me the other day was this gentleman who said, in the first 7 years of our life, we actually have set all of these ideas into our head. And so a lot of times it goes back to that so we can find out what it is that we set in our head so we can redo it, right? And that's what this teaching is all about, is shifting and changing those old ideas. And again, she mentioned that some of these are negative, some of these are positive, and they can be reflected on the analyst. So as an analyst, you got to be really careful, because you don't know what kind of response you're going to get from your patient. So it's really important to realize those things. And so it can be a useful tool to find out where a current issue in someone's life began. And to keep the patient from becoming dependent on the analysis, we eventually have to break this transference. So eventually that takes place. Now, Ernest Holmes knew this, and he mentions this in Living the Science of Mind. He says, this means that the patient's possibility of happiness must return to himself and not be imposed on the analyst. For where the treasure is, there will be the heart also. I love that. Where the treasure is, there will be the heart also. Consequently, the transference must be broken in order that the patient may be made whole psychologically, which in this instance means emotionally. So that's what he's talking about. He got this stuff. You know, and it's just so powerful to realize that. So when we talk about this, it's important to realize that analysis is not complete without the breaking of the transference. So if we don't break that transference, and the reason I say that is that Ernest Holmes, when he talked about transference, he talked about so many more things than that. He talked about that this transference is taking place in many different ways in our life. So it's imperative that we break this for our own well-being and so that we can get in touch with the heart of our truth, right? Because that's where we want to be. So in the book, he goes on to say something, and I love this when he talks about this ideas of other ways that we are doing transference. So there are people who depend on certain books, perhaps even the Bible, for their happiness, without in any way discrediting the value of these books or the supreme value of the great Bibles of the world or of the great teachers who have brought us the highest and the best the world knows. Even these transferences must be broken if we are to become whole. For nothing should stand between us and the universe. Nothing should stand between us and the universe, right? And so, you know, this brings to mind for me a really funny story. When I was in Palm Springs, California, I used to go and listen to a gentleman who spoke on the Course in Miracles. And he was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to him. He'd always include different things, different readings, a little science of mind and all of that. And one time he was speaking with us and he said to us, he said, you know, there are those in the Course in Miracles who are very strong and it must be done according to their book only. And he said, so he had had a lot of negative experiences with some teachers in the Course in Miracles who said, you know, that he was breaking the rules. You can't be doing that. And I thought it was so interesting because I thought, oh, Course in Miracle fundamentalists. I didn't know such a thing existed. But it was amazing. You know, he said he did get a lot of negative feedback as a result of that. So it doesn't just mean the Bible or anything else. You know, we can get so stuck in this. It could be even, some of us in Science of Mind can be a little stuck to the text, right? So we need to work on breaking that transference. So there is a common thread in these last two quotes that I just had up on the screen for you here today, and I think this is an important thing, and it's a powerful realization. But both of them included a statement about the word whole. So becoming whole psychologically and emotionally, and regarding breaking transferences to books so we could become whole. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, we have to throw the books out, because we don't, obviously. I know that for myself, that many times when I'm in a place where I'm maybe a little out of alignment, that I tend to turn to my spiritual reading, because that brings me back into alignment. Does anybody else do that?
Yes.
Right? We find ourselves getting into that place and drawing ourselves back into center by reading something by Ernest Holmes or knowing where to find something by Ernest Holmes, you know, that can really kind of bring us back into alignment with what's going on in our lives. So, the important thing to realize is that we don't need to quote Ernest Holmes chapter and verse. Because what happens when we do that? It becomes just a book, but not something we're experiencing. I mean, I can say that's a beautiful book right there. It's a beautiful book. And it's so great. But if I don't open it, and I don't use it, and I don't practice it, then what am I getting in my life? Am I getting alignment with the divine, or am I living in separation? Because that's what it's about. It's about being in that place of separation, and we don't want to be there. That's not what we choose. So what I want to look at now is I want to look at our core concept 5 in Science of Mind, which is wholeness. And I think it's always great to review these things to remind ourselves of what wholeness is. So here's what we have to say about wholeness. Spirit is a transcendent, perfect whole that contains and embraces all opposites. Wow. all opposites. It embraces all of it. The next one is, as human beings, we have free will and can choose what we experience, whether it be positive or negative. Right? Yeah, we've all chosen the negative, right? I'm going for the positive now. Thank you very much. I've had enough of the negative. And the last thing is that the same principle that brings us freedom, prosperity, and joy also allows us to experience bondage, lack, or misery according to our consciousness. Where is my consciousness? When I find myself experiencing less than the perfection and wholeness of the divine, where is my consciousness is the first question I need to ask. Would you agree?
Yes.
We need to go back to center. We need to go back to who we are. Thank you. So by breaking our transferences, we are returning to our wholeness. And wholeness is where we need to be. Because when I am whole, I can stand for anything. I want to share something just briefly that last night, Rev Ed and I stood with the gentleman that we've talked about several times in this community, who has been released from prison, and a community has turned to absolute fear and terror around his being released. And granted, he is a child molester of the past, but he's done his work. And so do we give everyone an opportunity? So we chose to stand in solidarity, and we had to be whole. Because we really had to be whole, because when we stood out in the community with in a candlelight vigil of solidarity for this gentleman, the community came out, ripped the placards out of our hands, broke our candles, and started yelling obscenities at us. And we had to go through this for probably about an hour because we chose to stand in solidarity and in love. And so we did that. But if I wasn't whole, could I do that? Right? So it's about being in that place of wholeness and knowing who we are and knowing that we stand for love. I didn't have to say anything. All I had to do was allow myself to be in the presence and know that I was holding the presence of love no matter what was coming at me. And that was the power. And that power was so strong that after an hour, they left. They walked away. And the love remained. So that's the power. That's the breaking the transference of fear and separation and the things that don't serve us. Why do we want to waste our time with that? So Ernest Holmes says, even the idea of salvation through some particular religion constitutes a certain sense of a kind of unbroken transference. I think many of us in our lives have experienced this with some maybe friends who, if I'm not saved, I'm going to burn in hell, which I don't choose that in my life anymore, because I know that there's more than that, because my relationship to God is way deeper than that. I don't have to accept anyone else's way of getting there, and all the religions in the world are teaching love. So if I can't be in love, then I don't belong. So it's important that I stay in love, right? That's the important thing. So he goes on to say that people believe that they can be saved or healed only through certain formulas, methods, or procedures, through certain prayers or incantations. Sounds like he even talked about our Wiccan friends, right? Incantations, right? Are different things. So all of these things are wonderful, but they don't mean the truth. Because the truth is coming from within, breaking the transference or the dependence on something outside of us to stand in our truth. So the other day I went to support a friend, actually a friend of Rev Ed's and mine, at her father's funeral. And this was a Catholic service. It was a mass. And it amazed me as I sat there, I watched, and the priest mumbled the Eucharist. Mumbled it. I could barely understand what he was saying, and I thought, the Eucharist is a beautiful thing. And yet it had become so rote that it meant nothing. And even the congregation, all of those who were there in support, were just kind of blindly mumbling back things. And so I thought to myself, if this is what they believe takes the soul to heaven, wouldn't you do it with more gusto, with more joy, with more connection? So it was just so amazing to me to sit there and watch that, and I thought, this amazing soul, which was this our friend's father, was already, in my book, in the divine energy. It was already working. Because when we transition from our physical body, my belief is that we become one with the universe and get to experience no separation anymore. Because in the human body, we experience separation, right? Because we're physically separated. So we got to break the transference to that idea as well. Would you agree? That we're not separate, that we are one. And even those individuals who were yelling and telling me all these things about myself that I was so surprised to find out. I didn't know all these things about myself, and yet they felt they needed to tell me when I had never said a word. You didn't know who I was, but somehow you knew my whole life, which I'm glad it's not my life. But, so, you had to be in that place of knowing who you are. We all have to be in that place. And, I'm not saying it's as extreme as what we chose to do, but everyday life can feel a little extreme. Would you agree? Do you not sometimes find yourself in everyday life feeling that there's a lot of extremes in our life, and we need to get centered so that we can be present and be that. We need to break the transferences from fear and become whole. So the last thing I want to talk about is that's the last thing I want to talk about. The last thing I want to talk about is that, Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon, who is the spiritual leader of Centers for Spiritual Living, loves to remind us that it's only form. So when I say that, what does that mean? What he's telling us is that form is not permanent. What's coming up in your life, the experiences, the physical things, are not permanent. They're coming from a deeper place. And so it's only form means, it's only form, I can change it, right? I can change my mind at any point and start to plant the new seeds of what I want. Every day, I do that. Every day, I find myself in a place of really working to create that truth in my life. Now, it sounds trite, but it's the truth. The law is always at work. The important thing to remember is that the law of mind is always at work, and our job is to keep our thoughts in line with our desires. Would you agree? To stay in that place of where we want to be. So what I want to do is I want to give you a couple of hints as we move forward through our daily life, how to stay in alignment. So we begin by letting the physical circumstance, we do not begin with letting physical circumstances define us, because that's not what we want to be. So this is what we want to move to. And I want to start with this slide, because I think this slide kind of says it all. Bummer of a birthmark, Hal, right? Right? But see that target right there? When we react, we place that target on ourselves for all of the arrows of life. Would you agree?
Yes.
We are drawing that energy to us. Because what happens is, when we react, we become a victim, and the victim has the target, right? So we want to get rid of the targets. So how do you remove the targets from your life? I'm going to start by saying we move into our heart space. One of the things we learn in this philosophy is that love is the way and law makes the way possible. You can take the slide now, Vinny. I'm a Far Side fan, in case anybody knows. So, If love is the way and law makes the way possible, then where do we need to be? In any situation, where do we need to be? In the love, right? If I am coming from my heart space or the love space, then I am setting the tone of beauty and kindness and inclusivity and all of the things that I wish to bring not only into my life, but into the life of the world. Because as I do it for myself, I touch many different lives. Would you agree? We each do. We are always touching others' lives. I want to be in that heart space. I love this little phrase. I'm kind of like rephrasing it. You know, it's as the Christians used to say, you know, what would Jesus do? I say, what would divine love do in any situation, in any experience? What would divine love do? We have taken the steps to remove the targets for others to shoot at. So we're moving into the heart space. We're removing the targets, right? We're removing the targets from life. And we're taking back our power. When I come from love, I stand in my power. When I come from fear, I'm standing in a much more negative space. Would you agree? Life does that. That's how it works. The law is always responding. And lastly, when we see obstacles in our way, we can ask, what are you here to teach me? When an obstacle shows up in your life, what are you here to teach me? What can I learn from the situation? How can I personally grow? Because it's all there for us to grow. It's all there for us to grow into a greater way of being. So in my life, I've had many opportunities to use these steps to move back to the true divine power. And I welcome you to use these steps as well to get you back to your true divine power. Because that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer you, using this wonderful affirmation that was in Living the Science of Mind for this week. So I'm doing this like a meditation. What's going to happen is I want you to just relax into your seats. And I want you to, if you're comfortable, you can repeat after me. I'll speak it slowly. And what this is I'm using this as a process to help us break transferences in our life to anything. So if you're comfortable, you can just relax, take a deep breath. And just feel yourself fully supported by your chair. And if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes if you haven't already done so. And just repeat after me. Bless my father and my mother.
Bless my father and my mother.
My brothers and sisters.
My brothers and sisters.
Everyone whom I have ever depended upon.
Everyone whom I've ever depended on.
I love and appreciate them all.
I love and appreciate them all.
I recognize the good I received from them.
I recognize the good I received from them
At the time when it was necessary that I receive that good.
at the time that it was necessary to receive that good.
But now, without thinking any less of them,
But now, without thinking any less of them,
I know I am whole within myself.
I know that I am whole within myself.
There is finally only one Father
There is finally only one Father
and one Mother,
and one Mother,
which is God.
which is God.
And in this one,
And in this one,
we are all brothers and sisters.
we are all brothers and sisters.
I love everyone, but depend upon no one.
I love everyone, but depend on no one.
Nothing can rob me of this love
Nothing can rob me of this love
I have for others.
I have for others.
It cannot be rejected
It cannot be rejected
because I am love,
because I am love,
and that which never rejects its own creation.
and that which never rejects its own creation.
People, things, institutions,
People, things, and institutions,
methods, sciences, philosophies,
methods, sciences, philosophies,
all are good.
all are good.
From each I shall learn everything that I can,
From each I shall learn everything that I can,
and with deep gratitude
and with deep gratitude
acknowledge the good I am receiving
acknowledge the good that I am receiving
from whatever source,
from whatever source,
but I am still whole within myself,
but I am still whole within myself,
dependent upon nothing,
dependent upon nothing,
and yet always interdependent with all things.
and yet always interdependent on all things.
Now gently allow yourself to return back to the room. Take a deep breath. How did that feel? Powerful, isn't it? Yeah, if you got the living the science of mind, it's right in there. Yes. Remember. Oh, I'll have to But that's something you can use anytime you want.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great thing that could really take us back to center. Really get us back into a place of taking our power, holding our power, knowing our power. So in conclusion, transference is when we give our power over to anything outside of us. Would you agree? And we don't need to do that. We don't need to. We have everything we need within us. We just need to turn to that. Ernest Holmes reminds us to break the transferences that do not serve us to get back to a natural state of wholeness. And I love that. Wholeness, which is where we want to be. Remember, it's only form, and that means we can change it anytime, right? We can shift it, we can change it anytime. We get ourselves in alignment, know our truth, and move forward. Right? All right. Now, take the steps from victimhood to divine power. Begin by moving into the heart. Ask what love would do, or what divine love would do. That's a great thing. I use that a lot. What would divine love do? Because it just stops me, it makes me think, and brings me back to center. Remove the target from your back or your front. We don't want to be like Hal. Right? Okay. And let the outward appearances of limitation be our teachers by asking, what are you here to teach me? So when limitation shows up in your life, what do I need to know? I love to go into contemplation and say, what do I need to know about this situation? Because it brings me back into the center of who I am. And the answers come, because when we're quiet, we can actually hear. The intuitive voice cannot come through when our mouths are flapping. So we have to take that quiet time. What is it I always say? That when we pray, we're talking to God. When we meditate, we're listening to God. So it's important to remember that. And then the last thing I want to remind us is Ernest Holmes tells us love is the way, and law makes the way possible. So let's move in the way of love. Will you join me in that? All right. Namaste.
us into a wonderful space. So I am grateful to know that God is so many things: power and peace and truth and kindness and the all good of living and life, and that God is love itself. And I know that truth of myself. I am exactly in my own little essence, in my own little world, that which God is, individualized. And knowing that, I know that of each of us unique and individualized, are love and peace and truth and power and joy. And as we know, and as I know this truth of myself and each of us, I know that each of us have that power to create our lives, transferring, transcending, and becoming the fullness and the wholeness of what was intended for our lives. That's God's joy as we recognize the truth of our being. I feel so excited to be able to express this truth. I know that each one is on a path of spiritual wholeness. There is nothing that each of us cannot accomplish in our lives if we choose it. Choose it because it is the beauty of making lives work successfully, joyfully, and peacefully. With that, I express gratitude, knowing that being a part of a philosophy of spiritual existence creates a life of balance and harmony for all. It is a joy. And as I know this truth, I put this out to the law, knowing that this is so for everyone. And with that, would you all join me in saying,
And so it is.
I was just so, thank you, Barbara, that was beautiful. I was like in another place. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, that was the time for us to welcome our guests.